The sun was hours from rising, yet Japan had already lost more than 100 men. Now, 200 more were marching toward the narrow sandbar ahead, a strip of ground the Americans had turned into an impenetrable fortress. Attempting to break was insanity. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki knew that, but he also knew that if his men could somehow force their way through it, Guadalcanal could finally be reclaimed for the empire. And so, the second charge began. The summer sun burned high over Guadalcanal as a group of 38 freshly arrived Japanese soldiers pushed forward through crocodile-infested lagoons and thick jungle that threatened to conceal the enemy behind any tree or bend in the trail. A few miles ahead lay Lunga Point, a pronounced stretch of coastline along the island's north shore, where the Americans had carved out a makeshift foothold. It hadn't even been 2 weeks since US Marines had landed on Guadalcanal, yet they had already turned this patch of land into a headache for Japan. Roughly 11,000 Marines were dug in around the perimeter, and an operational airfield known as Henderson Field was bracing for launching aircraft raids all across the island. If the Japanese failed to crush this growing menace quickly, they risked losing all of Guadalcanal. Luckily for the Empire, they knew just the man to win back every square foot of land the Americans had taken from them. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki, commander of the 28th Infantry Regiment, was known for his ruthless, take-no-prisoners approach to war. Even as he landed on the island with just 916 men, he was already writing in his war diary. August the 18th, landing. August the 20th, march by night and battle. August the 21st, enjoyment of the fruit of victory. Senior officers had warned him to wait for reinforcements, but Ichiki refused to listen. His troops were some of the best warriors Japan's army had to offer, and he had no intention of leaving them standing still. Within hours of landing, 800 soldiers were already moving west, with an additional 100 more poised at the rear. The formation was positioned roughly 9 miles east of the American lines, and all that was needed now was for the 38-man patrol Ichiki had sent forward to give them the all-clear. But before the green light arrived, gunfire erupted from the jungle, meeting the leading Japanese patrol formation right where they stood. The Americans had found them first. The fire seemed to erupt from every direction, leaving the Japanese patrol with no choice but to turn and run for their lives. But even that wasn't enough to save themselves. The American patrol outnumbered them nearly 2 to 1, and for every bullet the Japanese managed to evade, another tore through the jungle right behind it. When the gunfire finally fell silent, only 5 Japanese soldiers had managed to escape. Ichiki had lost the element of surprise, but it didn't concern him. Even with just over 900 men, he remained convinced he could shatter an entire Marine regiment, provided he was smart enough about his approach. The plan was direct. The force would advance along the shoreline, push through the Tanaru River, known to the Americans as Alligator Creek, and slip into the northeastern edge of the Marine perimeter. From there, a night assault would drive straight toward Henderson Field. But as Ichiki moved his men forward in the early hours of August 21st, it became clear the path forward would not be easy. Now, fully aware of the Japanese presence, the Americans had fortified the eastern bank of Alligator Creek. Machine gun nests and foxholes covered the approach, reinforced by 37mm anti-tank guns loaded with canister rounds, capable of cutting down multiple men with a single blast. Still, there was no other way. And so, Ichiki ordered his men forward. The attackers surged across the shore, rifles raised, firing blindly into the darkness as they charged toward the barbed wire separating them from the American lines. The men of the first wave, nearly 100 soldiers, immediately got a taste of just how brutal the fight would be. Some were cut mid-leap as they tried to vault the barbed wire. Many fell down before ever reaching it. Caught by American fire the moment they stepped onto the battlefield. The lucky ones were those who, by pure dumb luck, managed to somehow reach the Marine gun pits, seizing the Marine positions with their bare fists if needed. But even they could not last for long. Almost as soon as they had managed to capture a position, American guns swung toward them and opened fire. The first group of attackers was gone in less than an hour after the charge had begun. But Ichiki was not ready to concede. His regiment was painfully close to the American perimeter. Clear this stubborn defensive line, and victory would be his. And so, with nearly 100 men already lost, he wasted no time calling for another assault. This time, 150 to 200 soldiers, ordered forward all at once. But no matter the increase in force, the result appeared to be almost identical. Japanese troops were cut down by the dozen as they surged across the sandbar, weaving through enemy fire and stepping over the bodies of their fallen comrades. If the Japanese were going to survive this fight, their strategy had to change. Before they too were destroyed on the sandbar, a small group broke away from the main assault. Instead of charging the bend where the American machine guns were concentrated, they pushed through the creek farther south, slipping past the strongest fields of fire. Their objective was an abandoned amphibious tractor near one of the more isolated Marine positions where a 37mm anti-tank gun was being manned. From there, the Americans struggled to bring effective fire onto them, and for the first time since the start of the battle, Japanese troops were able to return the attack at least somewhat efficiently, cutting down Marine defenders one by one and disabling some of the positions that had already cost the Japanese dozens of soldiers. It should have been the beginning of Ichiki's breakthrough, but by the time these gains were made, the rest of the second wave was already gone. Nearly 200 more men lost just like that. And still, Ichiki believed he could somehow turn the battle around. Unable to break through the American lines, either across the sandbar or through the creek farther south, Ichiki decided his men's last chance lay with the sea. The plan was to move out into the ocean surf, beyond the Americans' main line of fire, slip past the barbed wire undetected, then turn back toward a far less defended stretch of beach. As the soldiers waded into the water, no American fire came to meet them. For a moment, it seemed the plan might actually work. But as the column pressed on through the surf, their silhouettes began to take shape against the shoreline. On the beach, Marine gunners spotted the movement and swung their machine guns and mortars toward the water. By the time the Japanese reached the shallows, the Americans would be ready. The Japanese tried to gain the upper hand by opening fire before even reaching the beach, but it made no difference. The moment they tried to emerge from the surf, American fire tore into them. Men fell by the dozen, cut down in the water before they could take a single step onto dry land. Bodies piled up in the shallows, making it nearly impossible for those behind them to advance without being caught in the same storm of bullets. The slaughter was so severe that even when a handful of Japanese soldiers managed to crawl toward the Marine positions, the attack collapsed. The survivors had no choice but to pull back to the eastern side of the river or be wiped out completely. By now, Ichiki had exhausted every option. Still, he refused to leave the area. Whether he was planning yet another assault or simply could not accept defeat was unclear. What was certain is that staying put after the battle had already been lost was his greatest mistake, because now the Marines were finished defending, and as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, it was America's turn to lead the attack. The 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, led by Lieutenant Colonel Leonard B. Cresswell, was the first to move. With over 1,000 Marines involved in the counterattack, Cresswell pushed his unit across the river in two directions, one advancing from the south, the other from the east, methodically closing in on the Japanese formation until it was encircled. The trap tightened around the area where the Japanese had taken what little shelter they could find, a small stand of palm trees just beyond the sandbar known as the Coconut Grove. When the Japanese realized what was happening, they raised their rifles and launched a desperate bayonet charge in an attempt to break free. But by then, there was nothing left to stop the slaughter. Some tried to flee back toward the sandbar, scrambling onto emergency boats in a last attempt to escape. But they didn't get far. With the sun now fully up, aircraft from Henderson Field roared overhead, diving low and strafing the beach and shoreline, cutting down any Japanese troops who had managed to slip past the ground fire. All that remained now was to clear out the last pockets of resistance hidden among the coconut trees, including the stubborn commander who had led his men into disaster. Not long after the encirclement began, 4 Marine M3 Stuart tanks rolled forward. Their 37mm guns tore through the grove, crushing entire clusters of Japanese soldiers who could do little more than hurl grenades at them. Realizing the battle was beyond saving, Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki finally had to accept he had lost. Whether he was taken out by American fire or chose to end his life himself remains unclear to this day. By evening, the fighting was over. In less than a single day, the Japanese had suffered one of their worst defeats of the war so far, with around 800 men lost, compared to roughly 44 on the American side. The days of seeing Japan as the unstoppable warrior of the Pacific were gone. The Battle of Alligator Creek was lost, and soon Guadalcanal would follow.